For centuries, humans have looked at the sky with burning envy. Birds glide effortlessly through clouds, slicing through invisible rivers of wind, while we remain chained to the ground by gravity's unyielding grip. For thousands of years, people believed a simple myth. The secret lay in brute strength. It seemed enough to build a frame from willow branches and goose feathers, climb higher, flap your arms desperately, and the air would surrender. This romantic illusion littered the bases of cliffs with the broken bones of dreamers. Physics shows no mercy for ambition. The human body is a heavy, dense sack of water. Our chest muscles are too weak, and our skeleton too bulky for bird-like flight. Gravity always wins, turning attempts to cheat nature into brief, humiliating falls toward the unforgiving Earth. Today, we'll walk through the story of humanity's greatest triumph, step by step, revealing why the real revolution by the Wright Brothers lay somewhere entirely unexpected. Early inventors made a crucial mistake. They misunderstood what flight really means. Just lifting off the ground is only the first step. Take a crumpled piece of paper and toss it off a high balcony. It will tumble down chaotically, spinning and twisting, entirely at the mercy of random wind gusts. That's not flight, it's delayed falling. Now fold that same paper into a neat paper airplane and give it a gentle push forward. It glides smoothly on a cushion of air, slicing through currents, and holds a steady course. The difference between a shapeless ball and a graceful glider comes down to one fundamental idea: control. True flight isn't just about generating lift. It's an artful, continuous dance on the edge of disaster, the ability to set the rules and command the air itself. Failing to grasp this basic principle proved fatal for some of the boldest minds of the ancient world. In the 9th century, the Andalusian scholar Abbas ibn Firnas decided to challenge the skies above Cordoba. He covered his body with thick bird feathers, strapped wide wooden frames covered in silk to his arms, and stepped off a high hill, facing the wind. Surprisingly, the dense fabric caught an updraft, letting him glide over the valley for a few tense seconds. But the ending was harsh. Without a way to adjust his angle, his contraption lost stability, and a brutal crash to the ground left the inventor with severe spinal injuries. 200 years later, an English monk named Elmer from Malmesbury Abbey paid the same price with his health. Armed with rigid wings fastened to his arms and legs, he leapt from a 20-meter stone tower. That plunge into the icy air gave him a brief moment of triumph. The wind lifted him, carrying him 200 meters. Yet even the slightest gust from the side turned his flight into a deadly nosedive. Elmer hit the hard ground, breaking both legs. It wasn't a lack of courage that failed them, but the complete absence of any control mechanisms. Lying in a hospital bed, racked by unbearable pain from bones that had healed wrong, Elmer made a brilliant discovery, one that would outpace its time by centuries. Reflecting on his fall, he realized one crucial thing was missing: a tail. The monk understood that birds don't use their tail feathers for decoration. Instead, those feathers serve as vital tools for stability, damping dangerous tilts in turbulent air. This marked the first tentative glimpse into the true principles of aerodynamics. It wasn't until the Renaissance that anyone took a truly scientific approach. Leonardo da Vinci spent hours watching soaring birds of prey, filling hundreds of pages with detailed sketches. He became the first to theoretically describe the very nature of lift. Da Vinci grasped a subtle fact: air has density. The great inventor realized that a properly curved wing pushes down on a mass of air beneath it, creating a solid platform. It's like a broad wooden oar forcefully pushing against the dense river water below. The theory of lift was elegantly laid out on paper, and the critical importance of flight control became clear as early as the Middle Ages. It seemed the foundation was set, and humanity only needed to bring these brilliant insights to life. But the history of science rarely follows a straight line. Sometimes the brightest minds of an era don't push progress forward. They become a stubborn, concrete wall blocking the way. Soon after Leonardo da Vinci's breakthroughs, a towering figure would step onto the world stage, a man whose laws would forever change how we understand the universe. His authority proved so overwhelming, and his equations so dauntingly persuasive, that a single tiny mathematical mistake froze aviation progress for a whole century. Yet, if the first manned glider defied all calculations and soared into the air in 1853, why did it take another 50 years before humans built a real airplane? And how did massive government budgets turn into the most humiliating public failure in the history of engineering? Isaac Newton wasn't just a scientist. He was an architect of reality. His equations described the motion of planets and the fall of apples with astonishing precision. To argue with him was to argue with the universe itself, but this overwhelming authority, this colossal genius, ultimately played a cruel trick on the future of engineering. When a mind of Newton's caliber delivers a verdict, the scientific community falls silent. They dutifully record his words in textbooks as unquestionable truth. Newton calculated the parameters of fluid resistance and derived a formula describing how surfaces interact with oncoming flow. On paper, these calculations looked absolutely flawless. The problem was they hid one fatal flaw, a flaw that would consign the dream of flying machines to the realm of urban legends for an entire century. Imagine the greatest physicist in history proved mathematically that boiling a single cup of morning tea required the energy of an erupting volcano. The world would accept those calculations without question. No one would even try to invent a simple kitchen kettle. Newton did something similar with aerodynamics. He underestimated lift by a factor of 10 to 20. According to his authoritative calculations, keeping a heavy machine airborne demanded either impossible speeds or wings the size of football fields. The math insisted mechanical flight was simply out of the question. Scientists stared at those numbers, threw up their hands in despair, and went back to designing steam engines. Spending your life trying to break a fundamental law of nature, confirmed by the very creator of classical mechanics, seemed nothing short of madness. The breakthrough out of this intellectual dead end came from a researcher who trusted his own eyes more than dusty academic tomes. British Baronet George Cayley spent hours wandering across the windswept moors of Yorkshire, watching seagulls with sharp focus. These birds glided over churning waves, barely flapping their wings, and clearly did not draw energy from some erupting volcano. Nature laid bare the absurdity of Newton's calculations every single second. Cayley began running his own experiments with spinning rigs and scale models. He carefully measured how airflow pressed against surfaces with different curves. Step by step, he ignored the sneers of the conservative scientific community. This British aristocrat was breaking down the invisible wall that the great physicist had built. He realized the secret wasn't in Newton's flat, rigid equations, it was in the curved shape itself. Years of careful observation led to a revolutionary idea that changed engineering forever. George Cayley clearly identified the four forces of flight: lift, drag, weight, and thrust. This brilliantly simple model became the foundation for the entire aerospace industry to come. But Cayley didn't stop at theory. In 1853, he built the first glider capable of carrying a human. Made of wood, wire, and sturdy fabric, it looked fragile. Yet it was crafted according to the real laws of physics, not fantasy. They set the craft on the edge of a steep slope at the Brompton Dale estate, waiting for the right gust of wind. All that remained was to find a volunteer willing to trust their life to a wooden frame and step into the void. The elderly inventor was no longer fit for risky tests, so the honorable mission fell to his assistant. They placed the frightened worker in a cramped basket, pushed the craft down the slope, and then a miracle happened. The glider lifted off the grass, glided about 130 meters across the valley, and landed harshly but safely on the opposite meadow. It was a historic breakthrough. Emerging from the wreckage, a stunned coachman named Keeley had just completed the first flight and immediately quit, leaving behind a legendary line. He was hired to drive a carriage, not to fly. The theoretical groundwork was fully laid, and the practical feasibility had been proven. But if the basics of aerodynamics were already known by the mid-19th century, what secret did two modest bike shop mechanics uncover? Something that even the powerful head of the Smithsonian Institute, backed by massive government funding, failed to grasp? Washington, the late 19th century. The spacious offices of the Smithsonian Institution filled with the scent of fine cigars and fresh ink. Perfect blueprints and government-issued checks rested on massive oak desks. Samuel Langley commanded enormous federal funding. A distinguished astronomer, respected academic, and man of impeccable reputation, he had everything he needed for an imminent breakthrough. At his disposal were the nation's brightest minds, cutting-edge materials, and an extraordinary budget worth tens of thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, at the opposite end of the social spectrum, two unknown mechanics from Ohio worked in a cramped, oil-stained workshop, fixing broken bicycle chains. The contrast couldn't have been starker. The capital's academic elite, armed with limitless resources, faced off against provincial enthusiasts with empty pockets. The most frustrating part was how close the renowned professor had come to cracking it. His steam-powered drones actually flew beautifully. A steady hum from the engine, an elegant silhouette soaring over the Potomac River. These small machines covered hundreds of feet, holding altitude with remarkable consistency. But that triumph turned into an intellectual trap. Perfect test flights bred dangerous overconfidence, convincing the academic and his powerful backers that the final victory was just a matter of scaling up. Stretch the wingspan, install a heavy engine, and put a brave pilot inside. Langley firmly believed in a strict principle. The machine had to possess inherent stability, flying straight and true, like an arrow shot from a bow, resisting any deviation from its course. This unwavering confidence soon led to the most humiliating public failure of the era. A cold December morning. Dark, icy water shrouded in thick fog. In the middle of the river, a massive barge sways, crowned by a giant catapult. At the top of this colossal structure looms the aerodrome, a monstrous multi-ton machine made of silk and steel pipes, costing the treasury a small fortune. On the shore, reporters crowd together, cameras on tripods at the ready, eager for a scoop. A sharp command cuts through the air. With a tense creak, the powerful spring launch mechanism fires. The enormous assembly tears off its rails, hangs for a moment above the abyss, and instead of soaring gracefully into the clouds, it plummets like a stone. The nose crashes into the icy depths, sending a towering spray of water skyward. The test pilot barely manages to surface from the wreckage, miraculously escaping death inside the steel cage. Weeks later, they schedule a second attempt. The same barge, the same grand preparations. The result is even more humiliating. The tail assembly snaps with a crack on launch. The sturdy silk tears to shreds, and this multi-thousand-pound marvel of engineering shatters into pieces, splashing miserably onto the water's surface. The press erupted with ruthless ridicule, turning the scientific project into a national joke. Taxpayers seethed as they watched their savings sink into the river's mud. The public loudly demanded an end to funding this madness. Skepticism hit its peak on the pages of the country's most influential newspaper. The New York Times published a scathing editorial, declaring with unquestioned authority that building a working flying machine would take millions of years of non-stop work by mathematicians and mechanics. The verdict sounded like a death sentence for all of aeronautics. Experts dismissed manned flight as an impossible fantasy, a pursuit fit only for city madmen. The door to the sky seemed nailed shut by the heavy iron of common sense. The greatest minds of the establishment had completely surrendered to relentless gravity. The bulky, originally stable Langley aerodrome proved one thing clearly: throwing money at a flawed idea only makes for a costly mess. Yet, just 9 days after that scathing newspaper article hit the stands, two modest guys stepped onto the wind-whipped, storm-battered beach of Kitty Hawk. They had no government grants, no university degrees, and no press backing. What they did have was years of hands-on experience with a completely different everyday machine, one that revealed a paradox. What if, to conquer the skies, a design shouldn't be rigidly fixed but unstable from the start? Dayton, Ohio. A cramped workshop fills with the sharp scent of burnt rubber, thick machine oil, and fresh metal shavings. Two brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, spend their days repairing bicycle hubs and welding steel frames. Wilbur survived a serious injury in his youth. An accidental hockey stick strike to the face knocked out his front teeth and plunged him into a deep depression. He refused to enroll in a prestigious university, locked himself away at home, and spent years in isolation, caring for his ailing mother and devouring books from the family library. This forced solitude forged an incredibly sharp, analytical mind, a relentless perfectionist. The brothers had a crucial edge over the city's top scientists. They simply didn't trust established authorities. While renowned professors blindly relied on outdated aerodynamic charts, these provincial mechanics built their own wind tunnel from old wooden crates and a fan. They painstakingly tested 200 tiny wing profiles, carefully recording every number. Their homemade experiments exposed fundamental flaws in widely accepted formulas, errors that had dragged down inventors for decades. Everyday tinkering with spokes and pedals gave them a unique perspective on how things work. A stationary bike inevitably tips over under gravity. It only stays upright when moving, forcing the rider to maintain constant, dynamic balance. Wilbur spent hours on dusty plains, his eyes locked on hawks soaring overhead. These birds didn't just glide through the air like frozen sheets of plywood. They responded instantly to turbulence, adjusting the shape of their feather tips in tiny, precise movements. That's when a brilliant insight struck. A flying machine doesn't have to be rigid and stable. True flight demands controlled instability, with the pilot as the key player in an ongoing dance of balance. Official science took a completely different path. People like Samuel Langley tried to build a heavy airship modeled after a sea vessel, an aircraft that could hold its course on its own and stubbornly resist any disturbances. The pilot's role? Just a bored captain at the wheel. But mechanics from Ohio shattered this idea at its core. The sky isn't a calm ocean, it's a chaotic, swirling river of invisible whirlpools. Trying to push through that chaos with a rigid, unyielding frame guarantees disaster. The machine has to flex, yield to pressure, and adapt instantly to the slightest changes in its environment. This philosophy of inherent instability gave rise to a revolutionary control system along 3 axes: tilting the body during a sharp turn, roll; climbing steep hills or descending them, pitch; turning the rudder left or right, yaw. The pilot had to juggle all 3 dimensions at once. Wilbur invented a wing-twisting mechanism, a complex cable system that bent the edges of the fabric wing, perfectly mimicking the movements of hawk feathers in flight. No longer could a person be a passive passenger in a woven basket. Instead, they had to literally ride the airplane, lying face down in a special cradle, shifting their hips and pulling levers to keep a fragile balance with every passing moment. This 3-axis control system became the unshakable core of their future patent and sparked some of the fiercest legal battles of the early 20th century. The theoretical puzzle finally came together. Gliders without engines, tested on sandy dunes, followed every pilot's movement perfectly, gracefully dancing through invisible currents. But one last, most terrifying step remained: mounting a heavy, violently vibrating internal combustion engine and handcrafted wooden propellers onto that fragile, flexible frame. The brothers packed heavy wooden crates filled with parts and headed back to the windswept, storm-battered beaches of North Carolina. They had nothing but a homemade engine, a shoestring budget instead of massive government funding, and an unshakable faith in their calculations. Would their modest bicycle maker's luck and courage be enough to wrest those precious 12 seconds from nature? The very 12 seconds that would rewrite the rules of human existence forever? December 17th, 1903. A bleak stretch of land on the coast of North Carolina. A place called Kitty Hawk greets the inventors with a bone-chilling cold and a biting spray of sandy dust that cuts mercilessly across their faces. This deserted edge of the continent was chosen for one simple reason. It's swept by incredibly dense, steady storm winds. The headwind hits speeds up to 25 miles per hour. To an ordinary person, that force would bend them double, forcing a search for shelter. But for the creators of the flying machine, it offered a perfect invisible support. No cheering crowds surround them. No orchestras or government officials in expensive coats. Just a gray, heavy morning sky. 5 shivering members of the local life-saving station stand as accidental witnesses. And a fragile structure built from spruce strips, thin muslin fabric, and taut steel wire. Against the roar of the ocean, this web-like framework looks like a bold defiance of common sense. A simple coin toss decides who will take the step into eternity. The copper spinner of fate awards victory to the younger brother. Orville squeezes between the taut cables and lies down on the lower wing, settling next to the fiercely vibrating engine. The homemade aluminum alloy motor spits out acrid smoke, smells of hot oil, and roars so loudly it drowns out the crashing surf. 2 hand-carved ash propellers slice through the morning mist with a whistle, blurring into spinning discs. The craft slowly begins to glide forward along a narrow pine rail, laid straight over shifting dunes. The headwind slams into his face. The engine strains, pushed to the limits of its modest power. Then the resilient flow clasps the curved fabric surface, creating a life-saving difference in pressure. The runners lift off the guiding rail. The machine hangs in midair. At that very moment, one of the rescuers squeezes the rubber bulb of a massive camera. The shutter clicks, capturing this split second forever on a glass negative plate. But the photo shows more than just a daring leap or a circus trick with a glide. It offers solid, undeniable proof of conscious mastery over the elements. Look closely at the details and you'll see their bicycle-inspired philosophy in action. Orville lies face down, but he's not frozen by primal fear. His hips shift to the side, engaging a complex control system. He actively manages the tilt, bending the fabric's edges into the oncoming turbulence. His older brother runs alongside, eyes fixed intently on the soaring silhouette. There's no celebration in his stance, only the laser focus of a scientist watching his mathematical model come to life. This photograph would become the key, but long overlooked evidence of their groundbreaking achievement. The younger brother stayed in the air for just 12 seconds, covering a mere 37 meters. Today, the wingspan of a typical intercontinental airliner stretches far beyond that distance. But physics doesn't measure miracles with a ruler. It's the very act of defying the impossible that matters. That same day, the older brother takes the pilot's seat and makes a fourth and final push. He cuts through the sky for 260 meters, holding the unruly craft steady for a full 59 seconds. The era of 1,000 years of gravitational bondage has officially ended. What's truly astonishing lies in the cold, hard numbers. This entire project, one that altered the course of human evolution, cost its creators roughly $1,000 from their own pockets. Meanwhile, at that very moment, the city's elite spent $50,000 government dollars to ceremoniously sink their heavy metal dream into the murky river waters. Human intellect finally conquered the sky. You might expect inventors to win worldwide fame, scientific respect, and a place among civilization's greatest benefactors. They pulled off the impossible, proving their idea of controlled instability was right. But reality hit far harder. After mastering the heavens, they didn't realize the fiercest fight was waiting below, in crowded courtrooms and on the pages of tabloid papers. Their brilliant three-axis control system became more than a gateway to the clouds. It sparked a grueling, years-long patent war. How did the heroes who gave the world wings become the ones holding others back from flying? Their triumph on the sand dunes quickly gave way to paranoia. Returning home marked the start of a new chapter, transforming brilliant engineers into ruthless monopolists. The brothers truly believed they hadn't just made a successful glider. They had uncovered a fundamental principle of conquering the skies. They patented a three-axis control system, cutting off any future aviator's access to innovation. Their logic was unshakable. If someone wanted to take flight without crashing, they had to use their method for controlling roll, pitch, and yaw. And that meant paying up. This patent, filed deep in government archives, was supposed to protect their intellectual property. Instead, it became a noose tightening around the fledgling American aviation industry. The brothers hired a battalion of lawyers and systematically sued anyone daring to build flying machines across the United States. On this tense legal battleground, a perfect antagonist emerged. Glenn Curtis stood in stark contrast to the cautious mechanics from Ohio. He was a passionate motorcycle racer, a crowd favorite, an unstoppable showman, and a brilliant, pragmatic engineer. He didn't want to steal anyone's ideas. He simply aimed to fly faster and more spectacularly than anyone else. The Wright brothers' design relied on twisting the entire wing, a complex, physically demanding maneuver, and much like wringing out a thick cardboard box. Curtis found a far more elegant solution. He sliced the trailing edge of the wing and installed small moving surfaces, ailerons. On his famous airplane, the Golden Beetle, the pilot controlled the roll by leaning in the direction of the turn using special shoulder frames. It was a brilliant, intuitive innovation that still guides all modern airliners today. But for the creators of the original patent, these little flaps were a declaration of war. They saw ailerons as a direct theft of their intellectual property. Dry legal statements quickly ignited into a blazing personal hatred. Courtrooms, heavy with the smell of cheap tobacco, ink, and polished wood, stood in stark contrast to the endless sky, the very reason behind it all. On one side of the barrier stood the elder brother, a reclusive, painfully proud perfectionist who saw any change to his creation as a personal insult. On the other side was the smiling, charismatic racer, basking in the spotlight and the flash of reporters' cameras. This clash of personalities drained them both. While Curtis shattered speed records at public air shows, thrilling crowds of thousands, his rival hunkered down in cramped offices, meticulously digging through legal loopholes and gathering proof of violations. Their fight for justice twisted into a blind obsession. The inventor who once conquered gravity now shackled himself willingly to endless court battles. The price of this obsession was staggering. America, the birthplace of controlled flight, was sinking fast into an aviation swamp. Patent wars froze the development of aviation in the United States for years. While European engineers freely experimented with fuselage shapes, engine power, and aerodynamics, American designers dared not even approach their drawing boards, fearing crippling lawsuits. The heroes who gave humanity wings had turned into strict jailers, guarding the keys to the sky. But the harshest toll wasn't economic. In the spring of 1912, Wilbur's older brother fell gravely ill with typhoid fever. His body, exhausted by years of relentless stress, moving between cities and sleepless nights buried in legal battles, simply gave out. Wilbur died at just 45. A man who had ushered in a new era for civilization was consumed by the paper fire of legal bureaucracy. This senseless war felt endless, threatening to bury the American dream of air dominance under piles of legal records forever. Orville, alone and broken by loss, kept fighting legal battles out of sheer momentum, sinking deeper into isolation. But the world was about to deliver a cruel, ironic twist. It would force the government to step in, shattering this destructive monopoly once and for all. How would a single shot fired across the globe push the state to tear open patent cages, turning the surviving brother from an outcast into a living legend of the jet age? 1917, Europe drowns in mud-filled trenches, artillery fire, and poisonous gas. Squadrons of German and French fighters circle over cratered battlefields. The skies have become a ruthless stage for war. The United States is preparing to join this global slaughter. But they face a harsh truth. The birthplace of powered flight owns no modern combat aircraft. Factories sit idle. Drafting tables gather dust. Talented engineers are frozen, paralyzed by fear of relentless debt collectors. The irony cuts deep. A worldwide war, desperate for thousands of warplanes to unleash destruction, halts another conflict, the one raging between those very creators. The government, which once arrogantly dismissed the Wright brothers, now moves with ruthless military pragmatism. Federal authorities force all manufacturers, including Orville and Glenn Curtiss, into a single patent pool. The great battle for dominance over the skies doesn't end in a stuffy courtroom. Instead, it concludes with a sharp stroke of a general's pen. The monopoly collapses by command, driven by the needs of the front. After losing his exclusive claim to the skies, Orville sells the family business. He spends the next several decades as a living monument, trapped in the silence of a vast mansion in Dayton. This aging gentleman, with neatly trimmed gray mustaches, reads the morning papers every day. The headlines shout about unimaginable records. He watches silently as fragile wooden biplanes give way to sleek, all-metal fuselages. He sees Charles Lindbergh cross the Atlantic alone, battling exhaustion and ice. He witnesses steel giants with multiple engines and sealed passenger cabins rise into the sky. Technology races forward at a frightening, almost aggressive pace, leaving the creator of the basic concept far behind. To a new generation of bold engineers, he gradually becomes a mythical figure from dusty encyclopedias. Yet this old man still sips his morning tea on the spacious veranda of his home. He lives to see the jet age, becoming a unique chronicler of how their youthful obsession reshaped the geography of the entire planet. Spring of 1944 sets the stage for a moment of raw cinematic power. On a concrete runway, the newest passenger airliner, the Lockheed Constellation, vibrates and roars with 4 massive piston engines. It represents the pinnacle of engineering for its time, a gleaming silver Leviathan with a sleek, triple-tail design. Slowly, a 72-year-old Orville climbs the metal stairs, ready for his final flight. The ship's captain steps aside with deep respect, offering the legendary guest the left seat in the cockpit. The old man carefully grips the controls of this complex machine, weighing over 40 tons. The airliner lifts off gently, slicing confidently through thick layers of clouds. At that moment, time's spiral folds in on itself. The wingspan of this airborne giant stretches 37 meters, longer than the entire distance of that historic jump over the cold sands of North Carolina. The creator, who once worked with spruce branches, fine fabric, and homemade propellers, now pilots a craft that can cross a continent in just hours, soaring through the stratosphere with steady command. The extraordinary journey of one life reshapes how we see technological progress. The greatest gift that bicycle mechanics from Ohio brought to civilization isn't measured in engine horsepower, record-breaking altitudes, or tons of commercial cargo. Their true legacy lies in conquering time itself. Months spent on grueling, perilous transatlantic steamship voyages shrank to just a few hours of comfortable sleep in a soft chair above the clouds. Weeks of rattling through stifling railroad cars turned into a quick morning business trip. Aviation gifted humanity millions of saved years. People could finally use this reclaimed time to raise children, create masterpieces, make groundbreaking scientific discoveries, and simply live. Two determined brothers refused to blindly trust academic formulas. They didn't just learn to defy gravity. They shattered the ancient chains of Earth's pull and gave every future inhabitant of the planet the chance to live life more fully.